comprehensive review. Thank you. All right.
Okay, thank you. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sheriff Tim Turner. He's from Haskell County, a friend of mine. We worked on many cases of transporting clients and stuff like that, and so he's quite dwelt in that, and it's the reason I want him to come up and speak. Tim?
First of all, I'd like to thank this committee today for taking the time to focus on something I think is important to Oklahoma, and I think is important to rural Oklahoma as well as the metro. Secondly, Representative Randleman, Representative Walkie, I appreciate you guys as well as taking a bipartisan approach to approach this issue that rural Oklahoma has and that we see not daily but weekly in our area. And thirdly, I think that Ms. Castillo deserves a round of applause for standing in front of this committee today and telling your story. Your story should be told at our academies and around the state, because for what you have went through and what you have done, we appreciate you. So thank you very much. So first of all, speaking on Haskell County is a county of 577 square miles with a population of about 14,500. Now that population of 14,500 rises in the summer months as we have two lakes. First lake we have is Lake Eufaula, which encompasses the west side of our county, and we have about a third of Lake Eufaula on the west side. And on the east side we have Kerr Lake, which is a navigational channel for distribution such as feed and different things. So in a summer month, we'll rise to, especially a holiday weekend, we will go from 45,000 to 50,000 people, where normally we're at 14,000, and we have 9 full-time deputies and 17 reserve deputies. So with me coming here today and Representative Randleman asking me to come here, Oklahoma sets at about 20% of our population suffers from mental illness. Prior to becoming the sheriff of Haskell County in December of 2016, I served as the project director and supervisor for the District 18 Drug and Violent Crimes Task Force, which encompassed Pittsburgh and Haskell counties both. And I spent 6 years at DEA investigating federal drug crimes. So as a individual who spent very little time on the street in the patrol asset, when I took office, it was one of those things that the guy said, hey, we stay away from mental health. We stay away from emergency order detentions. We try not to get tied up in that, because what does that do? That takes away from our one deputy patrolling 577 square miles of our county. So as time went through, what did I see? I started seeing reoffenders. I started seeing people who kept reoffending coming to our criminal justice center that, hey, okay, yeah, they're substance abuse users. Yeah, they're thieves to the public. They're stealing to support their habit. They're stealing to support their needs. But what are we really doing? What we're really doing is we are continuing to put those folks in jail. We let them bond out. They get a suspended sentence. They get probation. They come right back. We're not really helping that individual. So in 2017, the end of 2017, I went to our district attorney's office and our judge, who we work fabulously with, and I said, hey, listen, let's start looking at an avenue to do a door-to-door program. And they said, what do you mean door-to-door? Hey, our door-to-door is, let's set our bonds at where we're setting them. A lot of our individuals in rural Oklahoma can't make those bonds, but our bond is not to show punishment. Our bond is to get them the treatment they need. So if you want out of jail and your family cannot make your bond, we find you a rehab and we send you to that facility. So we started that program, and we started that program in the jail, and our correctional officers started griping. Well, now you're making us take them to get TB tests. Now you're making us do phone interviews. Now you're making us do this. I said, okay, but we're doing it one time, and hopefully we won't see these offenders again. So we started that program, and that program has worked very successfully, where approximately 50% of our offenders are now asking for door-to-door programs, and we're supporting multiple different rehabs across the state to get those users that suffer from mental illness. Because, I mean, let's all be factual. Substance abuse users suffer from mental illness. So we've started that program, and we've had great success with that program. And then when they come back to our facility, or hopefully they don't come back to our facility. They wind up completing the program. They get a new court date, and then they wind up with a deferred prosecution agreement, or they wind up with a deferred sentence. And I am a big advocate of a deferred sentence, or if they already are a convicted felon, that we continue to put them on felony probation and let DOC or let our office, or the DA's office, supervise that probation, because we all know that it's going to take another 12, 18, 24 months for that person to have supervision to not reoffend, to not think, hey, it's okay to go use one time, I'm going to be okay. So we've worked on that program, and that program has become very successful. We're very big into the drug court program. We had a judge who did not really believe in the drug court program. We now have our Associate District Judge Brian Henderson, who is phenomenal with the drug court program, to the excitement of when they get their first check, they get a payday candy bar. You hear them congratulate each other outside of the courthouse. So it's become that program that we are excited about. But what else do we have to worry about in rural Oklahoma right now, or especially in the eastern side of Oklahoma? Well, we now have the McGirt decision. We now have, in our case, it's the Sizemore decision, which Haskell County is approximately 60% Native American. So now what do? We now have to send those individuals to tribal court. Tribal court's is not set up, nor does tribal court have the knowledge of what we're seeing with these folks who suffer from mental illness. And with tribal court, the offenders understand that there's nothing going to happen to them, so it doesn't affect them to continue to re-offend. So that takes a big portion of our teeth out of what we do. And I'm going to back up just a step and tell you another issue that took teeth out of what we do and took a lot of teeth out of our program, was when we, as Oklahoma citizens, voted on State Question 780. And I don't come here today to say that's a bad thing or a good thing. What I come here today to tell you is it was a horrible, horrible situation. Because if we look back at what offenders really were incarcerated for to begin with, 90% of the time when you look back, a simple possession charge that was in prison was reduced down from a possession with intent. A possession with intent charge was originally reduced down from a trafficking conviction or a trafficking charge. And the reason those reductions were done is because it was the time that they served in DOC. It was how DOC leveled that offender. So when we put that legislation in and that state question, what do we do now? We now have people saying, hey, it's okay to use drugs. It's okay to continue to suffer from these illnesses that we suffer from because I have no consequences. I have no consequences other than I'm going to go to jail. And in rural Oklahoma, and I will tell you that Sheriff Vicar Gallardo and I are very good friends. We come in at the same time. But my facility's totally opposite than his facility. He has mental health in his facility. He has different programs that financially a metro area can produce and can put into their area. We don't. We have started in 2019 with our health and wellness center. It's called the Stigler Health and Wellness Center. I went to them because they offer free services for folks who are below poverty. Well, if you're in jail, you're below poverty because you don't have an income, you don't have a job. So we started once a week doing hour-long group sessions for mental illness and substance abuse treatment. And they come in with their counselors. They go to each pod and spend 1 hour a week in each pod. I mean, that's not a lot of treatment, but that's something to start, hoping to plant the seed that these offenders will continue to see that there's a brighter light, there's a brighter future. So when we talk about State Question 780, it leads me to my second point of State Question 781. Where's the funding that was supposed to come to our facilities to help treat mental illness, to help treat substance abuse, to help treat those issues that State Question 780 passed that decriminalized? Where are we at today on that? Because what we see is we see these offenders reoffending, reoffending, coming back to our facility, and no treatment being offered because we don't have the funding to give them the treatment they need. Which puts me into where we are today with mental illness in Oklahoma, and especially in rural Oklahoma. So you have an individual that comes to jail. We do our intake. We also learn that during their stay that they suffer from mental illness. We set them up with Carl Albert, which is our facility that treats mental illness in our area of responsibility. But guess what they won't do? They won't treat an individual who's incarcerated. You know why they won't treat an individual who's incarcerated? Because they don't get financial funding for that individual who's incarcerated. So what do? Well, you go to your judge, you go to your DA, and you say, hey, we have to release this individual. Well, guess what? Just releasing them on a OR, a recognizance bond, is not enough. Carl Albert wants to see a signed paper by a judge showing that their case is dismissed before they'll treat them. So now what do? We now have mental health in our facilities because we can't release that mental health person. We cannot release that offender to the street because they're going to reoffend, but we can't get them the treatment they need because they won't treat an incarcerated person. So where do we go? We go right back to the court system, and when we want to talk about improving our incarceration, improving what we do in Oklahoma, well, it starts with our mental health facilities. It starts with our mental health facilities saying, hey, we understand that this person's incarcerated. How about you have your jailer who we're willing to pay and we're willing to send, how about we send them to some outpatient treatment while they're incarcerated? And then we can show the judge, hey, judge, listen, they're here on a misdemeanor offense. They've been to 10 sessions. Okay, guess what I'm going to do today? I'm going to release you on your own recognizance, but I want to see you follow up with the next 12 months of outpatient treatment. If you don't, guess what? We're then going to arrest you. We're going to put you back in custody. We're going to start your outpatient treatment through incarceration once again. I'm a firm believer that forced rehabilitation and forced treatment works because they get something out of it instead of nothing out of nothing. So I'm going to move to a normal emergency order of detention or emergency detention that a deputy would go out on. We get a call of a suicidal subject. We go to that suicidal subject. We make contact with that suicidal subject. The first thing we try to do is not place them in handcuffs. That's the first thing we try not to do. Because all we do when we place them in handcuffs is we make them think that they're now a criminal. There's times that we cannot do that because of their violence, because of their actions, but that's the first thing that we try to do. The second thing we try to do in rural Oklahoma is, okay, we try, hopefully, and you guys all will laugh when I say this, but hopefully it happens between 8 and 5. And the reason I say it happens is because our satellite office is open between 8 and 5. How many of y'all think it actually happens between 8 and 5? It doesn't. So our satellite office is closed. We want to talk about and please don't think I'm talking bad about the commissioner when I talk, but I'm going to give you guys some points that was not pointed correctly earlier in the day. We want to talk about our iPads that are given to our departments. I would be willing, and any one of y'all come to our agency and spend a week with us when we have a patient who's in a mental health crisis and watch our iPad work. It doesn't. When you press the button on the iPad, nobody answers it. When you press the button on the iPad, nobody answers it. You can continue to press that button for 45 minutes to an hour, and then you have to make a phone call. They'll say, get your iPad and press the button. Well, by God, we've already done that 10 times, and it ain't worked. So then you get on the phone, and they say, well, it's after 5 o'clock. Go to your local hospital. I don't have a person who's got a medical need. I have a person who's got a mental health need. So now we go to our local hospital. We go to our local hospital, and we sit in our local hospital from an hour to 3 or 4 or 5 hours. There's 2 things that we're doing now. What are we going through in Oklahoma right now? We're going through a pandemic. We're not going through a pandemic in Oklahoma. We're going through a pandemic nationally. But now I've put my deputy and the mental health patient in the hospital full of COVID patients waiting for a medical evaluation because it's after 5 o'clock. Well, a lot of times now what we're seeing is as soon as you bring that patient in, guess what they have? They have Sooner Care. They have insurance. So what does the hospital want to do? The hospital now wants to evaluate that patient for 24 hours. They want to admit that patient for 24 hours. Well, guess what it becomes? It don't become a medical need at that, or a mental health need. It becomes a medical need at that point. So now I have a deputy tied up in a hospital for 24 hours. If I can't get a hold of the doctor and say, no, we're not sitting there, we're going to leave them with you, which is not fair to that patient. So we battle that with the hospital. If they're not medical, they're mental. So once we get them out of the hospital, we now have to find somewhere for them to go. And we have to go to McAllister, Carl Albert. So we take them to Carl Albert and McAllister. Once we get them there, we now have to go through an evaluation process there, which is what the iPad was supposed to work for, but because nobody on the other end of the iPad will answer or evaluate your patient, you now have to go in front of the doctor at the hospital or at Carl Albert Treatment Center. So you get there, and when you get to Carl Albert, they're going to set you in a room. You're going to sit in the room 30 to 45 minutes to an hour. They're going to do an evaluation. They're going to try first to set up a safety plan for this individual. Folks, we wouldn't be there if a safety plan had worked to begin with. We're there because that person needs, and I'm going to tell you, it used to be 72 hours worth of treatment. Then it went to 5 days worth of treatment, and it's still not long enough for some patients. So we get there. We then get that patient evaluated. Hopefully, they'll admit that patient. If not, we have to take that patient back home. And guess what? Statistically speaking, that patient winds up being a client in your jail because they then violate a trespass order. They then disturb the peace. They then do something that we have to put them in jail for. And what are we doing? We're jailing a mental health patient. We're not jailing an offender. We're jailing a mental health patient. So once the evaluation's done, if they decide they want to keep that patient, now it becomes time to find a bed. And let's talk about finding a bed. These beds in Oklahoma are not for county sheriff's offices and municipalities. These beds in Oklahoma are for people who have insurance and people who have money. That's what they're for. They're for people who sit in these rooms to go sit in, or their family to go sit in. They're not for these people that have nothing on the street, because they will sit days upon days and lay on mats and floors. If you'll just walk through facilities, you'll see it. And they want to talk about jail being bad. Our mental health facilities are bad. We have no beds for these patients. And then when you start talking, and then when you start calling, because as you can tell today, I'm not somebody that's quiet, I'll start calling for our guys. I'll start calling other AROs, other areas of responsibilities. I'll call Green Country and Muskogee. And I'll say, hey, and I won't tell them who I am. I'll just say, hey, I'm having some mental health issues. Do you guys have any availabilities, any beds? Do you have insurance? Yeah, come on in. We got a couple beds. Then I'll call Carl up. Well, they're not for y'all. They're for these people. So what are we really doing? Are we really treating mental illness? No. We're using it as a lottery to make money off insurance companies instead of treating the folks who need to be treated. So, just last week, I have two instances and a couple other things, but just last week, we have a mental health individual who's been to Green Country Mental Health in Muskogee. That's where he's been treated. That's where he's been seen on multiple occasions. He comes to our area to visit his grandmother. When he's there, he begins to hear voices and have suicidal thoughts. And let me tell you, those are the ones that we need to focus on the most, because those are the ones that become violent. So we get him, we bring him in, and we go to the iPad. We go to the iPad. This time, after about 20 minutes, somebody answers and calls the iPad back. And they said, the doctor will be calling you in just a few minutes. So the doctor calls the office, not the iPad. And the doctor tells us, hey, I'm out to dinner right now with my family. It'll be about an hour, hour and a half till I get back home. But when I get back home, I'll call the iPad. So we wait an hour and a half, nothing. I call the doctor, and I explain to the doctor, hey, we're still sitting here with an individual who's hearing voices. She says, well, I'm just now pulling up at home, and let me get my kids taken care of, and then I'll get on the iPad. This is our on-call physician. So about 2 hours and 15 minutes, the doctor gets on the iPad. And what do? We take the individual home because the individual has a brother, has a sister, and has a grandma all at that residence. So guess what? Their idea was, well, we don't have any beds. But what we do have is we have 3 individuals at home that can take care of this individual all night long, and then we'll take him to the satellite office in the morning. And guess what? We were back out there 3 more times that night with nowhere to take him. Second individual that we have, and the second thing that we need to work on is juvenile mental health. And I'm not talking about just juvenile mental health as a whole, but I'm talking about juvenile mental health with juveniles who are lower functioning IQs. I ask you today that when you leave here, that legislators, you reach out and you find out how many beds that we have for juveniles with low IQs. We have less than 50 in the state. We have one individual. We started dealing with her when she was 14 years old. She's now 19. She's now in custody for a violent crime. We dealt with her from 14 to 15 to 15 to 16 to 16 to 17 until she became an adult, where we actually incarcerated her. She can't talk. She can't write. She can't function. She's a 19-year-old girl that when she was in our facility, she had a teddy bear that she slept with, and we made sure she had her teddy bear. We made sure she had her iPad because she's not an offender. She's a mental health patient that we, as sheriffs of Oklahoma, are having to deal with in our facilities. Our facilities are not for mental health. Our facilities are for bad people. Our facilities are people who continue to reoffend. And if we want Oklahoma to be a top 10 state, we have to quit putting a Band-Aid on mental health, and we have to fix it. And it starts right here at Oklahoma City at the Capitol. Thank you guys for your time today.
Thank you, Sheriff. Appreciate that much. We'll ask, are there any questions for him?
Representative Harden, you're recognized.
I really don't have a question for you. I just want to tell you that as a former sheriff, I understand your pain, both of you, and that we do have to fix it here. And that I've talked for the last 3 years that I've been up here, and we've got to get something done, because you're right. A jail is for bad people. It's not for people with mental issues. Thank you.
The biggest mental health facility is the county jail.
If you do have a question, just hold your hand up and the chair will acknowledge you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious real quick, when you're talking about making the phone call to the physician, right? How is that physician employed? Who are they employed by? How are they getting paid for the services that they're providing? Does that all go through the Department of Mental Health? How does that work?
So the physicians that we call is employed by the facility that services us. So it would be like Carl Albert. So that physician's actually employed by Carl Albert, not through the state. And one other thing, if I might add real quick, that the commissioner talked about this morning that I want to make very clear to this board, and I think Sheriff Rigolato will also agree. They're not looking for private transport companies come November 1st to transport these individuals. They're trying to contract with county sheriff's offices to do these transports. We just spoke about this at our last OSA meeting. We've been contacted. They're trying to put contracts in place for us to continue to do the transports. The reason that we asked for legislation to be passed is because these offenders don't need to ride in the backseat of a caged police car to get treatment. They need to ride in a minivan with somebody who's not in a uniform that they don't think is there to incarcerate them. But those contracts are being asked. They're asking us to put proposals together and to continue to do the services that we have done for years, except for today, where he said that we're actually looking for transportation to hire where they are, but it's Oklahoma County Sheriffs. So,
Representative Williams, you have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, you said that these people you bring in and you call to take to a facility and they don't have insurance. Does not Medicaid cover that Medicaid expansion that went into effect July 1st?
so what happens so if you have Sooner Care, Medicare, Medicaid, when you become incarcerated, those services go away. So if that was the case, we would be billing for all their medical needs, but county government is responsible for an inmate's medical care, and you cannot use those services once they're incarcerated. And I will tell you who's got the program down, got the program down pretty well, is the VA system. We deal a lot with the VA system out of Muskogee, and it's pretty top notch.
And I'll give you an example from what he's talking about. My practice is in Pittsburgh County, which is right next to Haskell. Haskell is in my district, most of all of Haskell. And if you take Shakota and you go straight to the line of Arkansas, and then you take Shakota and you go straight to the line of Texas, that's a southeast district. There are no adolescent units, none. And if you take adult units, then there is one in McAllister, but there is nothing down there. Good example, what you said. I had a kid 2 weeks ago that hung himself with a dog leash. And so he came to my office and I was trying to find him a place to go to because I couldn't let him go. And I was on the phone 4.5 hours waiting to get this kid placed, and it was all the way in Willow Crest in Miami, Oklahoma. Now, I will say this, with Commissioner, they're working with us now of trying to get 2 new stabilization units in southeastern Oklahoma. So she is working with us on that. But that is very true what you said. Appreciate you coming up.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys.
Just a moment, please.
I have a
Representative
question.
Gang.
Let's touch base again here on McGirt real quick. You mentioned that you have tribal mental health offenders. Are you seeing any tribal mental health victims due to the fact of McGirt taking place?
So I would love to address that. So what you have with the tribal system right now is they do not believe that they have to take care of mental health. They believe that it only applies to criminal law, and all mental health still falls back on the county sheriffs. So what we are doing with tribal members who fall under mental illness is we are taking them to their hospital in Tallahena, and we are checking them into their hospital because they have a mental health facility and a treatment place. They just don't want to take responsibility for those individuals. So we're forcing them to take responsibility for them. And I don't know what Sheriff Regalato's seeing in the Creek area, but that's what we're seeing in the Choctaw area.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate it very much.